Hello everybody, and welcome back to our next little video here, talking about Eberron. So as the name here, as that name here would tell you, this is talking about the races of Eberron. So I mean, it's really interesting getting into this kind of information. The races in Eberron, whether they be the core ones that you find in the PHB, or they be the unique ones that exist only in this world, there's so many changes to that. All those old school, like what we thought of them, the things that when you walk into a game, you just instantly know this. So not true in Eberron.
Yep.
It's incredible. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong. I've known you for a very long time, but isn't that one of the big reasons why you love Eberron so much?
It is one of the big reasons. It
Shattering
challenges,
conventions.
yeah, all the perceptions you have of like previous races are thrown out the window.
Yeah.
You know, elves are, can be murderous marauders, and orcs can be very peaceful, and I love that about Eberron.
Yeah, it's really cool because exactly, like, it shatters conventions. It makes you really think before going into it. So people always tease me because of the way I run my Faerun games, is everybody's a little bit orcist. But I mean, there's a reason why they are.
Yeah.
There's a reason why people look at orcs and they go, no. They've built that over the course of thousands and thousands of years of marauding, right? So this game allows you to turn that on a dime and really look into the races and analyze things and come up with your own character's personality that has these different opinions, which is really cool. So we want to get into those races, and we're going to go over every one of them. Why not? So we'll try to keep it a little bit buttoned it up, but I talk a lot. So yeah. Thanks. So it's like, no. Yeah. So let's get into this. So obviously, we have to start with humans. Have to start with humans because some people, like say when my wife plays D&D, she'll never play a human because she thinks they're vanilla, they're boring, whatever. While that might be a good argument in many other worlds, many other settings, in Eberron, that's so not true.
Yeah.
Humans have so much to do with a very diversified, very different type of history than you typically find in most other settings. For one, where most campaigns take place on Corvair, the continent there, humans aren't from there. So, tell me, humans, what do you know of their origin?
Yeah, humans, not originally from Corvair. They're from another continent called Sarlona, which I think we'll get into more later.
Absolutely.
But they weren't even like the original like prominent race on Corvair. For the longest time, it was run by Hobgoblins in the Dakani Empire.
Yep.
And only relatively recently, like in the scope of that continent or that continent's history, have humans taken control and established like their own empire and their own leadership. Yeah,
the Galifar.
The Galifarian Empire.
Yep, which is amazing. So the Nation of Galifar, Galifar Empire, whatever it's called. So that was what happened because they first arrived here about 4,000 years ago from that 998 starting date that we always like to talk about. So humans are different because, well, one, they have access to so many more dragon marks than the other races. As a matter of fact, humans have access to I think 3 humans-only ones, and one that is shared with half-orcs. The only other race that has anything like that is Half-Elves, which have access to 2 dragon marks right now. But it's kind of cool. So humans have their stats are pretty standard with whatever book you're picking up and playing with, but their role in the world and all the different things that are they're able to acquire, the different abilities they're able to have, is very, very diversified depending on the character you make, the way you play the game. And that don't mean everybody does that with no matter what game you are. Choose a different class, choose a different. It's actually a little bit further than that even, and we'll get into that as we talk about the classes and the houses and everything. But humans are not from here. However, the most prevalent race, because humans, like all worlds, are spread like cockroaches. If you feel otherwise, play Mass Effect or Stars Without Number. So the next race we're going to get into is one of the old fantasy races, one of the ones that everybody loves the most. Elves. Elves are so prominent in every world, but elves are different in this one. How do they stand out different?
So elves are originally, originally they were actually enslaved. They were a slave race by giants. They broke away from that.
It was on the continent of Zendrik, which is immediately to the south of Corvair.
They broke away from that and created their own continent, Arno?
Arno. Yep. Arno. Pronunciation's all up to you.
Where it's really cool. They have this whole ancestor worship and the concept called the Undying Court, which are essentially positive energy undead, which I think are a super cool concept. And they're basically just spirits who exist, and you can go to them for advice or ideas, and then you have the elves who eventually migrated over to Corvair and created the society of the Valinor Elves, who are vastly different from like any other race of elves I've ever encountered in D&D. They're marauders. You know, they're warlike.
So one of the important things to think about Aeronel elves is the reason why in the 3.0, 3.5 rule set, deathless is what you call positive energy undead. So while the Aeronel elves worship the deathless, that literally those that have earned the right to do so, the ancestors live on forever as undead, giving guidance, the undead court giving guidance to the living and helping like mold the world and whatnot. So they have their own ancestral worship, and one of the best positions you can ever have in that society is to protect the deathless. Like, I protect the undead from dying. But the Valinor elves take that to a different degree. They want to prove themselves. Kind of think Sparta. You think like the Riders of Rohan meet Spartans. So they want to prove themselves to their ancestors, to those around them, that they are worth it, that they are worth being sung on about it throughout the ages. They do so trial by combat. Like, I will die a glorious death in battle, proving my value, my worth. And so their worship of the ancestors is to take their names and use them in combat. It's actually very common for them to be Barbarians and Rangers. That's one of the most common, the two of the most common classes for them to play as. Sure, fighters and whatnot as well, but they scream rages as they ride into combat on top of their Valinor riding horses, which are very unique and amazing. Details don't matter at the moment. But, so yeah, they are very different. And where they get the name Valinor from, well, the reason why we refer to them as the Valinor Elves is they stole a portion of the land during the last war, during the past 100 years, and renamed it to Valinor. They renamed that chunk, this peninsula, Valinor, and they own it as their own country now, which is incredible. But like you were saying beforehand, they're marauders. They're bloodthirsty. They want battle for the sake of battle. It's not about good. It's not about evil. It's about glory. And so it's kind of interesting thinking about that and thinking about alignments, which we're going to talk about another time in Eberron, because it's about glory, not about anything else in there. So that's Valinor elves, but that leaves a third type of elves that exist in this world. Yeah,
of course. You have the elves who have are not Valinor, but they have integrated so far into the culture of Corvair that they become their own separate thing entirely.
They moved here many, many years ago. Shortly after the humans came here, they also started integrating themselves into culture. Maybe some of them even lived here when the Hobgoblins still had reign. But they have become Corvairian elves. And these elves you can think of as your standard run-of-the-mill player's handbook elves. So as right now, if I were to play this in 5e, choose whichever subtype you want. That's what you are. Have fun. Doesn't really matter. I'm assuming Wizards is going to do a better job than that. But for now, that's how I would run it, because they're your run-of-the-mill elves that you see everywhere. But keep in mind, this is a big difference despite that aspect of it. These are elves that lived in trees amongst pretty much only other elves for centuries and centuries and centuries. These Corvairian elves have lived amongst the shorter-lived races, almost exclusively amongst them, like not removed from them, for generations. So they don't think the way that other elves do, like, oh, I know things because I spend 17 years studying this leaf to understand the prominence and importance and blah, blah, blah. They don't think that way. These kind of elves think more like your typical everyday human. If you play the way that some systems work, they would die quicker because they're so involved in the lives of the shorter-lived races. Obviously, that's not standard D&D anyways. Okay, so that's elves, but elves, obviously, talk about humans, you have to talk about elves, you have to talk about Half-Elves, Helves, Hay-Elves. There's so many different names for them. So Half-Elves, they have a couple different types here too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Half-Elves are so cool in Eberron.
God, they're amazing.
So what happened was when you had these elves coming over...
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah, of course.
Half-Elves are so horrible. In 3.0 and 3.5, they were garbage, PHB Half-Elves. Nobody ever wanted to play them. I truly believe it was through the inspiration of how amazingly represented Half-Elves were in Corvair, in Eberron specifically, James Wyatt and all those other writers. Their incredible work with Half-Elves, I think, is what inspired Wizards to head from the bum and make Half-Elves an amazing playable race. Actually, arguably the most powerful race in the 5th edition PHB, which is kind of funny. But that was a rude tangent and interruption. Please.
No worries. So you had elves who came over to Corvair and saw these humans, and they saw an opportunity with these shorter race entities. So they started interbreeding with them, and they started marrying them, hoping to get mostly their wealth, mostly with the wealthier families. To their surprise, they could actually have children with these people, which had never happened before.
What are you, racist? Come on, they're not mules.
They just couldn't. That's core.
Yep.
So they had children, and they created these half-elves, this interbreeding of the two. And I believe that it's through marrying into like the wealthier side of humans that they were able to become their own established race in Eberron.
It not at first. It wasn't just like one or two generations. Like it took many generations.
It took many generations.
But they were already respected and given a position because of their marrying in and just taking it as their family's namesake.
Right.
So they weren't just like bastards and tossed into the gutters. Go ahead.
Over many generations of half-elves wanting to create their own line and make their own individual race, you now have what we call Corvair. That's what they call themselves. Children of
the
Corvair.
Koban, I think it's called. They call it the Kovar or the Koban. But Corvarian elves.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, Corvarian elves.
Yep. I think it's Corvar and...
Or maybe it is Corvar, okay.
It's Children of Corvair.
Oh, okay, Corvar. Yep. Okay, you are correct.
So, they created their own individual race.
1 point for Erin, 7 points for Scott.
Races are not my specialty, okay? We'll get into the Dragonmar houses later.
Yeah. So the... we should keep like a chalkboard with who's winning. That could be fun.
That'd be fun.
Can we keep track of the ones that are not recorded too, just so I can make sure I get all the points?
Oh yeah, no, we'll do that because I would definitely win.
Yeah. Oh. Moving on. So they became their own race, their own true blue. We breed with ourselves race, and actually, it's one of those. They became their own race through exclusive breeding. They didn't depending on which house you're from or whatever. It was almost seen as mudding the water when you a half elf bred with a non half elf.
Yeah, in Leondar it was a crime for a while.
For a long while, yeah. So I mean, this makes for an incredible way that we have half elves now because you have these half elves that are pureblood half elves that have been so for many generations of their family line, and they have their dragon marks, which is incredible. But then you also have the same old mudblood kind of half elves. When a human meets, a guy meets a girl, lines up the eye across the bar, and she's like, "All right, one night," and then chicka chicka brown cow, and you have a baby comes out, and it's a bastard. It's so funny because we have a world where half elves are elevated to this incredible race that many people respect, and they have all this power and this wonderment. I mean, they have the airships, but then you have a human with an elf, and it makes a baby that everybody hates.
Yeah,
that
hasn't changed.
Isn't that weird? I mean,
I've seen them on a wizard article called Newborns, Newborn half-elves, which I like.
That's cool. So it was a wizard article?
Yep.
I never read this article.
You sent it to me.
I read this article and didn't know its title. You're welcome. One for Scott. So, all right. So half-elves are super cool. It is actually Mathis's favorite race in this world, but certainly one of my favorite ones. Not my favorite, but one of my favorite ones. Okay, we're gonna go to the next one because they don't have any sub races. They don't have any ways to breed off and whatnot, but they're still very different in this world. And I know they're one of your favorite races outside of Eberron. So tell me about dwarves.
I don't know much about the Mirrorholds in Eberron, and I don't know much about the Dwarven race. I know about House Kundark. They are a society of bankers, and they keep safes, and they keep things protected. But outside of that, I don't know too much about them.
So they kind of break down into two subcategories, but really, no, they don't. So there's the, and this is a matter of when you talk about the Dragonmark houses, it's just, are they in a house or are they not in a house? But other than that, the dwarves are pretty much the same. One of the big things to note in Eberron is that the dwarves don't keep these big burly bushy beards that make all of us nerds nowadays feel like happy because we have these big beards. No, they actually keep them very much like how I keep mine, very cropped, very trim, very close to their face. They want to have this clean cut professional look at all points in time. I am way too scruffy for a dwarf right here. They would be super embarrassed with that if I was one of their sons or fathers or whatever. So male dwarves keep clean cropped beards very often. Female dwarves, it's extremely rare to find a female dwarf with a beard. As a matter of fact, it's so rare, most people don't think that female dwarves can grow beards in Eberron. Whether or not they can, it's up to you as the DM. So it's extremely rare to see a female dwarf with a beard. Males keep them super trim. They're not we hate all elves, we hate all orcs, drink alcohol all the time. No, they're actually like, okay, yeah, they have drinks, and when they party, they have a good time, but it's more about getting the job done. It's more about like keeping track of the numbers. It's more about propriety. They're actually, dwarves in some extent are kind of like the elves of this world. Long-lived, dedicated, and whatnot, keep to themselves, isolated from everybody else. Despite being integrated in everybody else, they stay underneath the mountains for the most part, and they control everybody's finances. Like, they are the ultimate businessmen of this world, or women, you know, of this world. And again, we can talk about houses another time. I don't really want to keep saying that. Okay, so dwarves are very different in their persona, in their presentation, and in their worldview. I mean, they owned a huge chunk of this continent before, and it was taken from them many years ago by the nation of Galifar. They honestly did not care that much. It was a little bit of a war, but then they struck a deal and it was over. And now they're just happy that they own their own chunk of land again as of 2 years ago. So they did a really good deal for that one too. And the dwarves are smart. Next one I really want to talk about is half-orcs, since we're talking about breaking conventions so much. Oh, half-orcs. Okay, so I've never seen you play a half-orc in Eberron.
No, I haven't.
Have you interacted with many half-orcs in Eberron?
You know, I haven't.
So do you know much about half-orcs in Eberron?
I know a lot about the house.
Okay, so we do have to draw a line between two different types of half-orcs, Corvarian half-orcs, like your ones that you bump into, and then tribal half-orcs, the ones that are more to their orcish roots.
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between those two. Not to say that orcs don't live in cities as well, but it's definitely that humans, raised by humans, you're almost exclusively going to be a part of society. If you're raised by orcs, maybe a part of society, probably not. So, Corvarian orcs, half-orcs, sorry. Standard, typical, you know, they're less racist. People are less racist against them. They are very well integrated. They half-orcs have a incredible house that they're in charge of. They're part of the Dragonmark houses, I should say. That things that they control. If you're not a part of the Dragonmark houses and you're just a half-orc in town, sure, you're bigger than the others, you're tougher than the others. You're not necessarily dumber, because the way 5e's rules work, in that edition, you're not necessarily dumber. In other editions, yeah, you're slightly dumber, but people don't disrespect you for it. You just have a place in society. Maybe you're a bouncer, maybe you're a warrior, whatever the case may be. They don't hate you just because you're half-orc. That's just not a thing that is a problem here. But that's one type of half-orc. The other type is the tribal ones. Now, what's cool about tribal half-orcs has nothing to do with half-orcs whatsoever. They're boring. They follow one parent or the other. It's about the orcs of Eberron. And we're going to get back to that one shortly, because they're not a typical playable race. Yeah. So it's about the orcs in Eberron. Next one we're going to talk about is gnomes. Hanging with my gnomies.
Do you like gnomes in Eberron? The Largo is very cool.
So cool. We're going to get into history another time, but how Zalargo came to be, how this country exists, is awesome. Okay? But the gnomes in Eberron, it only breaks down to house or not house. Yep. So gnomes here, they're, think gnomes everywhere else. They're happy-go-lucky, they're fancy, they like to have their drink, they like to have their food, their wine, they're fun. They get along everywhere. The only other, I suppose, subcategory that they have, if you're not a part of the house and you're not just a regular gnome, you might be one of the binders. This has very much to do with the magics and the magic items and whatnot that you're going to come across in Corvair, which we'll talk about in the future. But they're the ones that created and control the creation of the patents for elemental bindings, literally binding living elemental creatures. Are elementals really alive? Into gems to be used as magic. But worry about that some other time.
Okay.
Gnomes are super cool. They're great diplomats.
Yep.
But there's really nothing else to go over with them, are there?
No, not really.
I mean, gnomes are gnomes. They I suppose, aren't shattering conventions.
Not really, no. Gnomes are pretty standard in Eberron, surprisingly.
They live in normal society. They live in normal areas. They have their own, they have their own metropolises, but so doesn't every race, right? So, meh. So, I was wrong. Gnomes, they're not breaking conventions.
But halflings, though. Those break a lot of conventions.
Halflings do break a lot of conventions. So, you love halflings. I've tried to make you play a halfling for a very long time, and I've never seen you play one in Eberron, so...
Yeah, that was one of the first characters you really want me to play was a halfling. And I said, I don't know, I'm not really feeling it.
It's because you love Eberron for all the other reasons. Even though I know you like that character, you love Eberron for other reasons. But, so tell me about halflings.
Halflings have dinosaurs. And that's like the coolest thing about them, in my opinion.
Fun fact, Eberron has dinosaurs. That's right.
Eberron has dinosaurs.
It has dinosaurs there.
If it exists like in the 3.5 edition of D&D, it exists in Eberron.
It's not as bad as Galarian, what Pathfinder did, where everything of everything is always everywhere, which is super annoying. But there are dinosaurs there. It has a purpose for it, and it's not like crazy or out of place either. But so they break down into two categories, and I'll say this and let you go on. It's, are you a tribal halfling, and so live on the Talanta Plains amongst the dinosaurs? What they're nomads, nomadic tribal plains. Or are you a Corvarian halfling that's a part of regular society? Sometimes you can be both, and that heavily has to do with the houses. You could be a tribal halfling that then became a part of a house, and so now even though you're very tribal, you're now amongst the city, which is super interesting. Or you are a city one that because of your dragon mark are now spending tons of time amongst the plains and learning that culture. Playing just a halfling only campaign in Eberron could be so much fun. There's so much you can do. But please, talk about the tribal halflings.
The tribal halfling. So correct me if I'm wrong, because I've actually never played one with you, but I have with other DMs. But when halflings come of age,
on me.
I know, I'm sorry. Especially with this character. When they come of age, they go out into the Talanta Plains, and they get a dinosaur companion.
I mean,
potentially, or they fight dinosaurs, whichever.
I mean, something like that I would say is tribal by tribal. I would never force it upon a PC unless you want to do anything fun with that, whatever. But they certainly do have to. It's like a coming of age ritual where you go out to the plains and have to prove your worth. That's very normal in tribes in general. Specifically, you have to go and find your own dinosaur companion. Honestly, don't know off the top of my head. If you find that through a Google search and you want to throw it in the comments below and say, bam, I got a point, screw you, Delric, go right ahead. And you pat yourself on the back. As a matter of fact, here's that pat for you. Here you go. It's all right. Weird. There's a tribal version of them, and they go out, they have dinosaurs, they literally ride what's effectively like a raptor. They keep T-Rexes, in retainer for when they need them. They sometimes inspire herds of Triceratops as part of a war tactic. I mean, super cool. They also, again, we're going to get into history another time, but they also had a lot to do with undead during the last war. They had a lot to do with it, and that affected their culture and their mindset. So if you play a tribal halfling, chances are you don't like other people. It's almost kind of like, not as bad, but kind of think halflings from Dark Sun.
Well,
kind of.
Halflings from Dark Sun eat people.
Yeah, well, kind of. Diet Dark Sun halflings, DDH, okay? So that's where halflings stand. They're either tribal or they're Corvarian, part of a house or not. The ones that are Corvarian, not part of a house, thieves, gutter rats. Not all of them, but you see them. People know. Okay. After that, we have, that's it for our basic conventional races that you find in 3.0, 3.5. Before Tiefling and Aasimar and Dragonborn, all the races became normal. I'm sorry, I'm just not a big fan of normal races looking extreme. It's really hard to, that's a different tangent. So I'm not a fan of extreme races. I like the core ones.
Because Dragonborns wouldn't probably exist in most of Eberron.
No, they do on one island. Off of one continent, very far from here, but for the most part, no. So there are 4 other races that were introduced by Eberron. So these are the new races, something fun and nifty to learn about. Maybe you've heard about them because they've been stolen from Eberron and used in other settings as well, to one degree or another. Oh man, Pathfinder totally did this. It was funny. With their androids or whatever they called them.
Oh yeah.
So first one I want to talk about is shifters. What's really cool about these races is that they're all mixed race, well, except for one. They're all, 3 of them are mixed races, and they have their own little interesting stuff. So I'm going to cover shifters, because I think I know more about shifters. No, actually, shifters is a strong suit for you. You cover shifters.
Kind of. I know, so I play a lot of characters from Thrain who are responsible for killing shifters and trying to wipe out that line.
It's a theocracy there. It's a very, very religious country.
Yeah, but there's a purpose behind it. So shifters are kind of like lycanthrope, like half-borns, but not quite, because again, like these are like lineages that have been passed on for many generations. So they are very feral. I don't think they can transform all the way, can they?
No, not full transformations.
But they're just very feral humans. Yeah.
Their name is boring. Shifter is because they literally shift slightly. Oh, go ahead.
They're still very hunted and looked down upon by Thrain, which is one of the original 5 nations.
Okay, so first to really explain shifters, unlike what I did with the orcs, we have to talk about lycanthropes for a second. Tangent. Eberron had 13 moons. There's 12 now. When you have 13 moons, there's 12 now. Hovering around a planet that has on it creatures that have the ability to shapeshift when those moons are full. What if there's 2, 3 moons full in the sky all at once?
Yeah, lycanthropy was a problem in Eberron.
It was a serious problem. And sure, some were more linked to some moons than to other moons or whatever. But yeah, it made for some serious issues. They were very dangerous. And so the lycanthropes were hunted and hunted and hunted down. And even though there was a sub-race of shifter that aren't as vicious, that couldn't shift quite the same, and we'll get to their details in a second, they were also hunted. As a matter of fact, one of the religions there, the Church of the Silver Flame, were the ones that did this, like, it wasn't like an inquisition. It was more like, I don't want to say the word, but almost like they went holocaustic.
Yeah, it was a genocide.
It was genocide. So they would round them up and just slaughter them, and it was really bad. Burn down huge patches of forest and whatnot. It was really bad, to the point where almost all shifters, if they haven't been able to find their way in society through proving themselves time and time and time again, way worse than any half-elf or halfling ever or half-orc ever had it. If they haven't integrated themselves into society, they're probably hiding in the Eldine Reaches, which is kind of central in Corvair. So it's a huge, massive forest, the largest forest that still exists on Corvair. But huge patches burnt down, just slaughtered like crazy. So the thing about shifters is, like you said, it was a lineage thing. Imagine a lycanthrope sleeps with a human. The baby might be a lycanthrope. Let's say it's not. But then they also sleep with a lycanthrope, and their baby might be a lycanthrope, but it's not. But they sleep with a lycanthrope. The baby might be a lycanthrope, but it's not. Anyways, you can see these genetic markers kind of building up, and the likelihood being greater and greater and greater over generations, and they breed with each other. And eventually, over the course of a very long period of time, evolution, right? New race was born of, they don't look human, or whatever race they might be originally. They don't look that way when they're not transformed, and then fully look half of one animal or completely into an animal form when they do transform. They look feral always, and they have the ability to shift, which is become even more feral. So if you imagine it, let's break it down like this. If a lycanthrope can be 100% human, 50% human, 50% animal, or 100% animal, the shifters kind of hover more around, let's say, like, they go slightly less of 20% animal at all points in time, and then shift into about 40% animal. So they never get 100% human. They never get 100% animal. They never even get 50%. They always hover between those two markers. It's kind of a convoluted way of explaining it, but it's probably the easiest without talking about White Wolf. If I was talking about White Wolf, it makes it so much easier. And they have their own different sub-races too, different types of transformations, just like anything else. Any other lycanthrope. But really, really cool race. They have a really cool origin and everything. And it's like you said, they're still hunted to this day, which is insane. Yeah. But, I mean, it's 2017, guys. Get real. All right, next one we're going to talk about is Changeling.
So Changelings, much like the Shifters, aren't quite like half-breeds, but rather like genetic, like, passes down over time. So Changelings are part Doppelganger and part human. What's
a Doppelganger?
A Doppelganger is a creature that can assume
lycanthrope, in case you don't know, is a werewolf, a were-tiger, a were-bear, were-boar, were-cat, I don't know, fluffy little cuddly creature. Whatever.
I played a were-swan once.
Please continue.
So doppelgangers are humanoid creatures that can transform into any other humanoid creatures with startling accuracy. And their children, changelings, have very similar abilities.
Yeah. So not to be confused with changelings that you find in Pathfinder, which I'm surprised they chose that name. It caused some confusion over on the Pathfinder forums for a while. But the the changelings have the ability to change the way that they look within a degree. Actually, kind of works within the spell Change Self.
Yeah.
First level illusion spell. But it's not an illusion, it's actual transformation. Up to a foot taller, up to a foot shorter, the hair color, things like that. So that makes for amazing espionage. Obviously, nobody's going to trust somebody that can change to look like we're talking about Mystique, a race of Mystique. Now, kind of funny, what does Mystique look like when she's not transformed? Keep that in mind, because changelings are the same way. No, they're not like incredibly sexy blonde people with blue bodies, or red-haired people with blue bodies. Okay, no. They're very gray. They have stark white hair, and their body is completely grayed out. It's not too dark of gray or too light of a gray. It's kind of a boring, dull, even dull is too descriptive, boring gray, with a stark white hair and gray eyes, irises. So they look very different when they're not transformed, and so they almost always take on these different forms because they aren't liked by almost anybody. And they make for a very unique race. They are also often found in prison or at the other end of a dagger in a dark alley, because you just see one and you're like, it's a changeling. They're obviously up to no good. And there are very few laws protecting changelings. It's actually kind of crazy because after the Treaty of Thronehold, there's so many things protecting all these new countries, all these new peoples. Changelings are very poorly represented. I mean, sure, they have rights, but do they?
Yeah.
You know, that's where it stands. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of them migrate to like Drom afterwards, because why wouldn't you? If you're being hunted in the other 5 nations.
Droam is a nation of like monstrous creatures. It is a mostly acknowledged nation in Corvair, but again, it's mostly monstrous creatures that live there. That's where you're gonna find like a society of like gargoyles and trolls and what are they called, hags and stuff like that. Yes, I did this because just read the book. Society is the appropriate way of saying it. So it's funny because, like I said, they got very poor representation during the Treaty of Thronehold, which was ended the war and kind of recognized people. But somebody else got incredible representation during that time. That's the Warforged. So you may have seen images of these, or you may have come across them before. They're called androids, which is super comical in Pathfinder. But the Warforged are a race of people that were literally created less than 100 years ago by the House Cannith. Houses later on, but more or less people that are crafters. It's a crafting mercantile guild. They created a race of robots. Okay. What are they really? It's hunks of wood and stone and metal thrown together to make a humanoid form. They are sexless, but some of them do choose to have genders, or maybe they didn't choose. Maybe they were born that way. Genders that they identify themselves as. Some of them identify themselves as genderless. Some identify themselves as both genders. Whatever. But the Warforged were literally forged for war. There were machines that were designed to just go into the battlefield and just slaughter. They were actually Cannith and the 5 Nations' response to the undead that existed at the time. That's a history thing. Worry about that later on. But they were tireless soldiers that can march forever, fight forever, didn't need food or water, didn't need all those typical resources, didn't even need armor. Their bodies made out of stone and metal. Sure, their joints and whatnot, their thinner limbs were made out of wood, but you had stone to protect it. You could put little bits of armor on there to protect that if you needed to. And they were born, and they were awoken with the sentience of an adult. Sure, they would have to learn things from there, like you'd have to teach them like how to swing a sword, and it doesn't take much to make a big giant stone thing go like this with a hammer or a sword and just push them forward down a battlefield and watch what happens. But they originally were created to be, they were dumber, they were slower moving, they were wimpy. There was like the first iteration of them. And then over time, they got better and better over the course of the last 100 years, newer generations, to the point where it's considered unethical to argue whether or not they are their own sentient people. They have a sense of self. Like the earlier ones, you can argue, I guess, even though they could speak, but they were dumb. They were like, yes, no. They have just as much personality and just as much sense of self-being and whatnot as any other person, any other race. But you want to talk about what happened in the treaty, or do you?
Yeah, sure. So you had this race of living weapons, but after the war, I mean, you had a race of fully sentient people who were essentially slaves. So the 3D Stronghold granted them full rights and representation as people.
Do you remember who was the one that pushed that forward?
I don't. Was it the King of Breeland?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was.
King
It's
of Breeland?
Boromir.
Yeah, Boromir.
Or whatever it is. So
Bornell.
Bornell. Thank you. I was like, no, I think there's Nell in there. So Bornell. Oh, damn it! So the King of Breeland was the one that represented them. He actually did a very smart thing. It's not unlike what some peoples did during the American Civil War. He said, "Come and fight the war in my for me, and I will grant you 100% freedom and all rights afterwards, like within his nation." And so he got tons of people to come, tons of warforged to come and work for him and be soldiers under him. And he was a man of his word. He was actually an honorable person and would have done that. But he did more than that. After the war was over, he went to bat and represented them and got them equal rights across all of Corvair. Every nation that's recognized by the Treaty of Thronehold is upheld to a certain standard. Think the UN is upheld to a certain standard, and they are a they're a represented race now. They cannot be owned, they cannot be purchased. As a matter of fact, they can't be created anymore, which makes it this interesting place for them. Imagine if you wanted a baby, but you couldn't have one because you were created and there's no more creation forges.
Yeah.
So you have these warforged that now are going to live for, who knows, forever? That can't reproduce if they wanted to. Trying to find their place in life. They've only had true freedom for 2 years, walking into most campaigns. So it makes for a very interesting mindset for them. Also, like, imagine being born and 2 days later you're thrown into war. Like 40 years after that, because you're an earlier model, 40 years after that, you're not like, I can be myself now? What do I want to be? I'm just going to go rob caravans because that's what I used to do. And that happens. That's just, when you're born into times of war, that's what happens. So, but anything else about Warforged that you want to toss out there before I toss a little secret bit of information?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So different makes and models, so different sizes. Whatever. So, did Kenneth actually create the Warforged? Yes. No. It's up to you as the DM, I suppose. But while it's believed that Kenneth did create these Warforged that exist today, you can also find a type of Warforged that existed in Zendrick tens of thousands of years ago, created by the Giants. Maybe it was inspired by them. Maybe it was literally their magics were stolen and copied. Maybe they just stumbled across a similar mechanic and just used it. And then by sheer coincidence, they have it over there. What's funny is we talk about the Warforged are less than 100 years old, but then you come across some that are over tens of thousands of years old in the continent just to the south. It's very interesting to think about. I think that sums up Warforged, which brings us to the last of our normal playable races in Eberron. Kalishtar. I'll let you start this one off.
Okay. So you can't really talk about the Kalishtar without going into Delcor.
Well, Delcor being the plane of dreams. It's a metaphysical plane that exists outside of here. It's literally where your mind moves to when you sleep at night. It's where you perceive your dreams and whatnot. It is a universe outside of this one, another plane of existence.
So you have a race of being on Delcor who are called the Quarry. The Quarry. And the relationship between Delcor and the material planet Eberron is actually really interesting. Before the separations, which we'll get into, they could influence one another, I believe. So, like, the dreams of the humans of Corvair, like, not the humans of Corvair, I think it was Hobgoblins or Giants at the time, would have an impact on their plane. So you have these people who are noticing this problem, and so they started to send people over here to take care of that.
Yeah. So we were manipulating their plane, and they were manipulating us as well, giving us dreams, giving us inspirations, giving us the ability to find magics. And I mean, think about it. How often do you come from a dream and you're inspired to do this or that, or whatever the case may be? So we would manipulate each other as back and forth, which I think what you initially said.
Yep.
And yeah, if that was something that existed in your plane and you're a creature that lives for all eternity, after all eternity, do you remember about that?
Yeah.
So that exists for all eternity. Wouldn't that kind of piss you off? So what's kind of nifty is the Quarry on Delcor. Not only do we manipulate their plane goes through cycles where there's like light cycles and dark cycles where their prominence mindset or like belief of things, or what's the word, like the psychic energy that's there.
Yeah.
The prominent part of it is either positive or negative. Like, and I mean literally, like, hey, you're an asshole, or hey, you're a pretty nice guy. Like that kind of positive or negative. And right now, it's in a state of light over there. No, sorry. Right now, it is in a state of darkness, and it's continuing in that state of darkness. And the whole idea is that those that are doing well, that are thriving in the state of darkness, they want to maintain it. They don't want us to affect their plane and push this pendulum back and forth and eventually cause this flip to happen, right? They want it to stay that way forever, to keep it the same. But then there's a different sect of them that are like, no, we need to keep pushing this needle. We need to keep things moving forward. So eventually the plane collapses in on itself. Everybody dies. Everything's destroyed. Whatever, and it flourishes back out with a whole new light plane. And one of the cool things that you'll notice is that in Corvair, some of the greatest innovations and whatnot that happen, some of the best magics that are ever discovered, are done when they're in their state of light. And some of the greatest times of war happen when they're in their state of darkness, because once again we affect each other. So a lot of that plane is like, fuck this noise. We're done with this. Let's keep things dark forever because we like things the way they are. And some of them are like, no, we need to continue pushing things forward to cause that flip. So now that we talked about the Delcor, we somewhat have to touch on Sarlona, which is a continent else from far away from here, and is the Inspired. The Inspired are a race of humans that had their souls more or less ripped out of their bodies and replaced, or soul was popped in there and consumes their old soul, by an actual quarry. They literally are a quarry living inside this creature. They're vessels. Now, their souls aren't completely gone. They're still around because the quarry doesn't always take over. It's not like they're there 24/7. They leave and come back as needed. But when they're gone, what's left behind is kind of a shell of who they were that wants nothing more than to make the thing that takes over their body happy. You know, it's almost like it's a religion. It's a state of worship that they do. It's the Dreaming Dark. So they take over the bodies of these people. Man, we're getting really into history here. Take over the bodies of these people, or whatever. So the Kalashtar, the reason why they're different is there was a point in time where those that are trying to oppose the Dreaming Dark, the Path of Light, those that are trying to oppose the Dreaming Dark, they left that plane to come to this one, to take over bodies here. However, when they did so, they didn't want to completely destroy the souls of those that they were taking over. So they actually there was a bunch of monks that existed out there that chose, I think it was 66 escaped. And so 66 humans chose to share their bodies and share their souls with these quarry. So the initial 66 that existed, they literally had two souls. It was like, I am a human and I am a quarry and this is who I am, and it's pretty awesome. They're super powerful. They had mindset of both of them, whatever. We don't care about them. The Kalashtar are the children of those 66. You can literally, if you're a Kalashtar, draw your line of lineage back up to one or two, well, definitely two of them, because you probably slept with each other at first, maybe with other humans. So one or two of them you can draw your lineage back to. As a Kalashtar, you're born with two souls.
Yep.
Your human soul that's intrinsic to you because you're your own person, and the soul of one of those 66, which makes for fun mechanics in the game. Please take over here because I chatted a ton.
Yeah, no, they're a psionic race, which is cool. I love psionics.
She giggles because 5e is garbage with
5e is
mystics.
garbage psionics. For now. We actually, I think the coolest Kalashar mechanics moment I saw was you actually let Eric, my fiance, your brother, his character, actually split his soul, and we got to see the core come out.
Oh, yeah. So you actually got to see,
Yeah, that was really interesting to see.
Yeah, you get to see the actual original
the character
personality.
died afterwards, but...
So the nifty thing is that when you are a Kalashtar and you sleep at night, you don't dream. You don't go to Delcor. You're completely removed from Delcor entirely, because if you were to be able to access that, they would just come into your body and kill you. Because they're trying to hunt you down and destroy you right now. The Inspired are to the Kalashtar. Kalashtar, vive la resistance. I so stumbled my words. Vive la resistance!
There you go.
Yeah. So the split race here. God, I'm dragging on for this one. Let me try to sum this up. You don't sleep at night. Instead, you remember. You remember the memories of your quarry soul. That's all you do. Every night when you go to bed, if you see dreams, they're memories of your Corey soul for the tens of thousands or whatever years that they've existed, that they've been alive. You remember instances that happened in their lives. And what's really cool about that is because you share a soul with Mom, that means you and Mom sometimes have the same exact dream. But because you share a soul with Mom, sometimes you remember things from Mom's life. Not from Mom's human perspective and Mom's human emotions about things, but from the perspective of Mom's Delcor that you share with her, because you both have the same, right, one of the 66. You remember things from the Delcor's perspective that your mom did in her life. Let's not get creepy about this, okay? But nonetheless, it's something that happens. It's something that exists, and it's really cool to think about. You have all these memories coming to you from ages past from an alien perspective. Yep. It's really nifty. They are a hunted race that live in a secret society. They are somewhat known openly in Corvair, but they are hunted by Sarlona. Sarlona is always, in Delcor itself, is always sending people over to try to hunt them down and kill them. Genocide is the only option to make sure that the Dreaming Dark succeeds and their current state of affairs in their plane stays forever. So that's a nifty race to play. Doesn't blend well with other parties so easily, depending on the story and the DM and the PCs. But is great for a standalone, again, Halfling only, Kalishtar only campaign. Yeah. Wow, we rolled on for a long time, but...
Yeah. Well, it's hard to go into the races without going into the history of them, and there's so much history in Eberron.
Especially the four non-core races that are unique to this world. So, I did want to touch on 3 other races really quickly because it's important in this world. I want you to run away with this one. Let's go to Hobgoblins. They're not a generic playable race, so obviously books and whatever system you're playing in might have rules for it. They're not a generic playable race. But Hobgoblins, they're unique in this world. Right. So just their impact, not the history too much.
Oh my gosh.
It's a different video.
Okay. Well, they used to rule Corvair. They don't rule Corvair now. They are a very militant race. They have a society that isn't quite matriarchal, but their politics and everything are run by the women, whereas fighting is done by the men. They work with House Deneth now. They live in Drum, and they also live in Dargun.
Dargun is where they have their nation.
That's where they have their nation, which I think they were given during the Treaty of Thornhold.
Yep, they did.
Also.
They were accepted during the Treaty of Thornhold, not to a way that makes all the Hobgoblins happy, but that's a different
they're
video.
Still allowed to do their own
thing.
Shtick.
Yeah,
slavery mostly.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's again they're accepted.
Yeah,
kind of
outlawed everywhere else. It's allowed in Dargun.
Yeah. You have to think, one of the reasons why I honestly think the reason why they allow Dargun to do what they want to do, even though the other places can't, is because you have to think of the Hobgoblins in this world like the Native Americans of the United States. They lived here first and covered the entire continent, and they just were here first. Another race came in and slaughtered almost all of them and brought them down to a small spot, and Dargun is more or less their reservation. And so while I'm not saying that Native Americans or the indigenous of the United States are people that want to keep slavery and stuff like that, I'm not correlating like that. I'm just saying this is almost like the reparations being paid by the humanity in the Treaty of Thronehold to them. Yeah, here's a plot of land. You can do what you want with it, whatever it may be. Slavery, build a casino, do what you want to do. We don't care. And that's kind of like why I personally have interpreted Dargun's allowed to do those terrible things. But that's a different video again, going really into it.
Yeah.
The big thing is that they are very much involved in current politics, and they should be a playable race. They are so involved in everything, and that's why I've allowed one in one of my recent campaigns. Yeah. Goblins. Another one I want to go over. Goblins, more or less, just think they fall under the same flag as Hobgoblins, while Hobgoblins were the race of goblinoids that everybody... they're the respected race of goblinoids. They're the ones that were in charge. They're the ones that had the kings and whatnot. It was very feudal Japan. They were the ones that controlled all of everything. Goblins were very often their serfs, somewhat their citizens, often their slaves that were underneath the Hobgoblins. And same for bugbears too, but they weren't as easily taken over as the goblins, as the goblinoids, the other goblinoids. Orcs is the last one I'm going to go over, and that's it. We're done.
Okay.
Orcs. Okay. Orcs in this world are very different because of something else that happened in the past. You see, we talked about how Delcor sent the Quarry over to try to take over this world, and where they had their impact against the Hobgoblins. Different again. There was another plane that also tried to come over at one point in time. It's the plane of Zoriat, whatever. It's a chaotic plane where aberrations come from. All aberrations come from there. Sure, others might be created by magical experiments or whatever now, but all aberrations originally came from there. Where are Beholders? Where are Illithids? Where are Aboleths from? Zoriat. So when they came here and almost took over this entire planet, they tried the plane. They tried to take over this entire thing. I wouldn't say the entire plane because, think about it. Faerun wasn't affected.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Right. Different crystal spheres in the same plane of existence.
Fair enough.
So while they would try to take over this planet, and they were being very successful, it was through a lot of self-sacrifice, and it's through ancient rituals done by other races too, like the Githyanki, Githzerai, and stuff like that too. Yeah, but it was done by the Orcs. Ancient Orc tribes that were taught, their original magics were taught to them by a treant.
It doesn't say druids, right?
Yeah, it was. So hold on. No, that's not true. The original magics were taught to them by dragons. They were druids, Orcish druids. Magics were taught to them by dragons forever ago. And the dragons also created a treant that has the, or an ent, that has the, that's sentient and continues to teach things moving forward. But they have these ancient rituals to help keep that plane locked out. There's literally planar seals that they guard and watch over, and always doing rituals to keep them powerful. And sometimes the power fluxes or wanes, and they go right there. And as a matter of fact, they did such a good job that they separated that plane from this one so much so that you can't even access it anymore, which is insanity. But orcs in this world are not dumb marauders. They are an ancient culture of druids that want nothing more than to protect the entire planet. Literally the entire planet. Sure, trees and grass and water pollution and light pollution and sound pollution and my poor chicken has its head caught inside a 6-pack plastic ring, but they actually are trying to protect the whole planet from other planes.
Yep.
So I suppose that covers the races of Eberron. Any other side notes you want to throw in there? Anything else?
No, I think we're done.
Cool. Awesome. Well, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please throw them in there below. If you have something that you want to know about, something specifically, if it's one or two quick things, I'll totally respond to you. Maybe if there's enough questions, I'll come up with a response to these in a video format that Aaron and I can take our turns trying to see who knows better. How do we regulate not studying first? I just won't tell her the questions in advance.
Hey, that's not fair for me.
What?
If you know the questions in advance, then...
Oh, I'll just totally read them like at that moment and be like, oh yeah, this is a question.
I think this is rigged.
Oh. So, questions and comments below. Anything about what's going on with this video. I hope you like this video. I hope you enjoyed. Please hit that subscribe button if you want to learn more about this, watch some more gaming happening and whatnot. But I'd like to say thank you, Rinson, for coming on by and doing this this video with me, talking about the races of Eberron.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye, guys.
See you later. Just guys?
Just girl. What?
Guys and gals. Got your back.